All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome to the Week 15 edition of Slate Breakers. I'm Peter Goffin here alongside Chris Mitchell. You're listening to Slate Breakers presented by Fantasy Data. We're going to be diving into lots and lots of good DFS content today. As always, got a fun show on tap. Got a couple Saturday games this week. Those are off the main slate, and so we drop back into that more usual 11-game range. There aren't a ton of high totals and obvious spots that might shoot out, so we're going to be a little bit clever in terms of how we're going to attack stuff, but certainly going to do our best to help you work your way up the leaderboards here in Week 15. What's going on, Chris?
Not too much. It is freezing cold outside up here in Boston, and we've got a foot of snow on the ground. I was golfing a couple weeks ago. I was watching major championships not that long ago. Now it's football season. The season's almost over. The playoffs are almost here, but it's like 20 degrees and snow on the ground. It feels like football as I'm sitting here freezing my tail off in the kitchen.
Absolutely. There's nothing I love more than snow football. We did get our first trickles here in Chicago. It ended up sort of melting, so I was able to get a nice track workout in. But I'm ready to just pelter the ground with snow in lots of these games, and hopefully we will see some of it rolling on here this week. So as usual, we get buy or sell, circle back with targets and fades, round it out with the stacking. You guys know the drill by this point. Chris, take it from here, and let's go with the buy-sell.
Thank you very much, Peter, and Slate Breakers podcast here. Fantastic to be talking some football with you this week. Let's get right into the buy or sell. I'd like to get your thoughts on some general things. Obviously, we apply them to daily fantasy sports, so let's start right there. Let me get some of your general thoughts about the slate, just your initial reactions. I'm looking at it, not loving the quarterback position, and I'm starting at the quarterback position because it pains me to say it. But once again, in back-to-back weeks, I actually like the tight end position. Again, grading on a curve. But nonetheless, looking at the slate, again, not loving the quarterback position, actually liking the tight end spot. What are your general takes on when you first started doing research for the podcast? What are your thoughts on the slate this week?
Yeah, my initial read before even looking at the Vegas metrics was, hey, there doesn't seem like a ton of obvious spots to go to here. And I know we've had that type of situation a couple times this season. And of course, it manifested itself where there are no totals above 51.5. And of the teams that are projected highly in terms of their team totals, Tennessee, the Rams, Baltimore, Indy, Tampa, Arizona, and Kansas City, those ones all at 27.25 or above. They're pretty much all solid favorites. Kansas City's only a 3-point favorite on the road against the Saints, but all the others are favored by 6+. And, you know, your top three teams, Titans -11, Rams -17.5, Ravens -13. And so we're going to have to be thinking about that sort of situation of, can these guys get there, even if they're playing with a lead? And certainly a player like Derrick Henry or, J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers, the running backs there, can feed off that game script, but it isn't quite as good if you're looking for volume from an A.J. Brown or Cooper Kupp. So definitely a lot to sort of think about in terms of the lopsided games.
Let me ask you about that, if I can go off on a tangent a little bit, as I like to do. We've got a couple of those college-type spreads, not quite, but NFL example of college-type spreads. You just mentioned them, 11 points in the Tennessee game, 17.5 in the Rams. As a gambler, we do a little bit of gambling talk on fantasydata.com, and we're trying to expand even further. How do you handle those big spreads? When you see Tennessee having to cover 11, and when you see the Rams, as bad as the Jets are, 17.5 points in a league that is even the worst players, the difference between the good and the bad is pretty close. 17.5 is an enormous line, and it's hard to love Jared Goff to begin with. How do you handle games where the spread's that significant? I mean, I don't like a 6-point spread, and I'm looking at 17.5. I mean, how do you project game flow and intelligently say, oh, yeah, Rams 17.5, that's an easy one. I'm taking the Rams. I mean, how do you handle that when it comes to looking at the spreads, and what's your instinct when you see spreads that big?
It's a pain, right? Because even if the Rams dominate the game, there's always that sort of backdoor opportunity where it's like they build a 30-point lead and then Darnold throws 2 garbage time touchdowns and, well, they won by 17. And there's nothing that the coaches or the team did wrong. You would understand that, this is a team building for the playoffs. They shouldn't be overly concerned with letting up some random stuff in the fourth quarter. So I generally would not be inclined to attack the spreads or even the lines, in terms of the money lines for the more skewed games. And the other thing to note is, right, like if you have a model or something and it's saying, oh, we have 2 points of value. Well, 2 points of value is only, 8 to 10% of the spread when it's approaching, 15, 17, 20 points. So I think those are more kind of stay away. NFL lines in general are hyper efficient. I'm a fan of going to the props and whatnot, but I generally, even if you want to bet, closing lines, I think the ones that are really heavy to one team are not the ones that you want to be attacking most of the time.
Now, from a DFS perspective, when you see a 12-point spread, an 11-point spread, a 17-point spread, that suggests, if Vegas is right, that those games should have a lot of garbage time. It doesn't look like that's going to be a nail biter where one team wins 10-9. Does that impact who you go after? Because garbage time is easy time, so mediocre players can really get opportunities and they can score easy points because, again, they're down by 20, so the defense is playing backups or not even trying at all. The offense is getting these easy little, they're playing zones in prevent defense rather than bump and run and things like that. Does that encourage you to, say, target a Jacksonville who's got a 12.5 point spread against the Ravens? And, again, Tennessee, Derrick Henry looks like a monster guy this week, and in order for Tennessee to blow them out, he's going to have to be good, so you're going to get some good value on Henry. But if it's an 11-point spread, maybe he doesn't even play much in the second half, whereas maybe you like Detroit because they're going to be throwing all day. When you look at these huge spreads, especially the Rams and the Jets, are there any players that stand out for you because of those lines where garbage time? I don't see how anyone likes the Jets ever, but it looks like there could be a lot of opportunity for Darnold to be throwing the ball in very easy situations in that Rams game. If they get out, to a big deficit early, Darnold almost could be a great play. It would be odd, but the line suggests that it's at least a possibility, right?
In theory, but right, like they lost 40-3 to the Seahawks last weekend. Darnold completed 14 passes for 132 yards, no touchdowns. And it's like, that's the floor you're getting with the Jets. I think it's different with other teams. Like even the Jags, Minshew has a tendency to throw a lot of, dump offs and whatnot. And so I think James Robinson could easily get you like 8 catches just from, those random garbage time drives or whatever. I'm more inclined to think about something like that. The other point to note is, though, just because a team's favored by 10 points or whatever doesn't mean that they will always lead throughout the entire game or that they always will win by, 2 scores or something like that. And so one way you can get leverage is saying, okay, yes, Tennessee is favored by 11 points, but let's say that they play a competitive game. I think Chase Daniel, might get the start and be better than people think. I'm going to stack up Tannehill, A.J. Brown, Jonnu Smith, run it back with Marvin Jones or something like that. And all of a sudden, if those guys do well and you have a shootout, you have massive leverage over all the, Derrick Henry lineups, and you just have a nice, unique build. So you can't really go in with any type of certainty for games, even if you think they're going to play out a certain way.
And I haven't been following the spreads all that closely, but there looks like to be a lot of larger spreads this week than normal. Not only the 17.5s and the 11s and the 12s, but 6s, 7s. It just looks like a lot of the games, the spreads seem to be bigger than I usually see. Maybe I'm wrong, but that was just my impression of just glancing over the slate real quickly. I ask you this most weeks, but let me just get it out of the way now and get your thoughts. Are you afraid that any teams have just completely and totally thrown out the season and they show up dead? I could see how the Jets wouldn't give a damn and they show up and, like you said, they lose 40-3 because they stink and they don't even try. Any teams concern you as far as that goes, so you're staying away from them? And then on the flip side of that coin is, are you targeting against them because they're a wet blanket out there?
I think the Jets are pretty bad. I would be hard-pressed to do anything more than maybe grab one of their, punt wide receivers. If you wanted to, grab like Denzel Mims at 3,500, it's like, well, if he scores 7 points, it didn't really kill you. So I think it's hard to say anyone that cheap is, a horrible play or something like that. But they seem the most likely to roll over. And so Cam Akers is the guy who would most likely be the beneficiary of that type of situation.
Where are you starting your build this week? And when you're looking over at the rosters, you're looking at all the different positions and the pricing this week. Where are you starting your rosters? Where are you starting your build and how are you going from there?
For tournaments, right, the stacking's always going to be crucial. But I think running back in where I might be paying up is going to be crucial. So Derrick Henry, are you playing him or not playing him? If you're not, you need to figure out what type of, leverage you're trying to create with that decision, given that he has such a big ceiling. And then beyond him, Dalvin Cook's a nice pivot, probably a tournament-only guy. Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, both going to be very popular. And then even guys like Kamara and DeAndre Swift and Dobbins and Leonard Fournette's another one who should be popular that I'm interested in. I think exploring that position is going to be very important as you try to fill in the other pieces around your stacks.
Let's talk about a few players before we get to the targets and fades here. Cam Akers was a yearly league hero last week. I've carried him all season long, loved him in the preseason, wrote him up for fantasydata.com, talking about him. I thought he was maybe the best rookie in the class as far as running backs anyway. Never really got an opportunity until the last few weeks. He goes out, wasn't on the slate in DFS last week. He's finally going to be here this week. You buying into Akers? His targets are up, his touches. You buying in, or is this a cautious situation?
I'm in on him, definitely. I mean, he has 50 carries over the past couple of weeks and has been really solid. Just great efficiency against the Pats last week, too. And he's not getting as much usage in terms of the targets as we might want to see. And so the floor would be slightly concerning if this were a more competitive game, but knowing that the Rams should run away with it, I think you're in a pretty good spot with him. Granted, have to always throw in the Sean McVay caveat. He might just say, you know what, Malcolm Brown's being revitalized and will be the lead guy. So I do think there's a little bit of a concern there, but in general, I'm feeling pretty excited about jamming in Akers to a good bit of builds.
Yeah, McVay's done a good job of doing the Patriots out west this year with all those running backs. None of them very good, and yet not giving Akers a chance until this late in the year. It's really pissed me off. But I do have him this week, and I'm going to need him in my leagues. I made a couple playoffs, and he's on all of those teams because, again, I was higher on him in the preseason. We saw Jalen Hurts last week. He's not exactly Michael Vick or even Lamar Jackson, but he's obviously got some athleticism. You buying into him? I don't like the Eagles. It was interesting to see Miles Sanders finally have a good game. We saw Taysom Hill do bad things for Alvin Kamara, and yet Jalen Hurts gets out there, and all of a sudden Miles Sanders is a guy that a lot of people thought he would have. Now, granted, he had one enormously large run, and maybe that's a lot to do with it. But anyway, general thoughts about Jalen Hurts.
I'm excited about going back to him. I mean, I loved him at 5,100 last week, and now at 59, he's not quite that same value, but it's one of those things where you think, if Jalen Hurts ends up being a solid NFL quarterback, we will never get to play him in the 5Ks again for the rest of his career, just based on the rushing equity. And so, yeah, of course we should be jumping on it now, especially here with, a better matchup against the Cards that could be a paced-up game. And the kid ran for over 100 yards last week. If a QB can get you the bonus on the ground, I'm all in on him. And so I definitely think he's someone that we want to be going back to. I know there is a little bit more of an issue when hey, now there's, a week of tape and stuff, and the Cardinals should be prepared because they have Kyler in their own backfield, understanding and practicing all that type of stuff with the QB scrambles. But I think that he's a pretty safe guy if you want to build him in for cash, and certainly tournament option as well. But you can run out naked, too, if you're just trying to be unique.
From one runner to the next, a cheap one to an expensive one. The Jacksonville Jaguars, according to DraftKings, is 27th against the quarterback position. Everybody's able to throw against the Jags. Everyone completes passes against the Jags. Their completion percentage has been over 70% for most of the season. I didn't actually look at it this week, but every single week I have looked, it's been over 70%. Lamar Jackson, one of his weaknesses is accuracy. So even against the Jaguars, it seems like as long as Jackson can find water along the outside of the boat, he's going to be able to complete some passes. But you got to pay up for him. Does it matter whether a team is good or bad against the quarterback and whether that stat is even accurate when it's Lamar Jackson? Because really, when you start him, aren't you starting him because of his legs anyway? But anyway, your thoughts at the second highest rated quarterback price-wise and the easy matchup, does it matter?
It's still nice in terms of having confidence in the Ravens' ability to move the ball all the time. You're right. Jags allowed 69.8%, completion rate, 8.2 yards per attempt. That's the highest in the league. Touchdown on 6.3% of pass attempts. That's second highest in the year. And so it's a really good spot for Lamar here. My concern with him is that I think the Ravens run him most when they need to. And, he had a little bit of a knee issue earlier in the year, but there was that game against the Bengals that they won 27-3 and Lamar ran twice for, 7 yards or 3 yards or something like that. And this could be one of those games where they say, hey, we're trying to, gear up for winning out. We want to make the playoffs, yada, yada. Why make Lamar take any hits at all? So I'm not sure that he's a guarantee to get all the carries on the ground that you'd want him to, especially when they presumably build a lead. But yeah, I'm very good on going to Lamar this week. And you got to remember that 7,500 is not as expensive as he was to start the year. I mean, he was above 8K, so you're still getting a discount on what sort of vintage Lamar